Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to State of Europe, Friends of Europe's online festival of politics and ideas. We're nearing a close. This is our last and final day. We've covered a number of big ticket items over the days. And today, and the session you're going to be involved in discussing is about connectivity. It's under the theme of people, trust and fairness, which are, I think, the planks underpinning any activity related to connectivity, especially in these COVID times. Before I say a few words about the session and invite our contributors to stimulate our thoughts, think about ideas and identify or develop solutions to the issue and the conundrum, if you like, of connectivity, which can be both a force for good, but also a force for bad. But before I do that, I want to share with you some rules of the game of engagement. Firstly, those of you on Zoom will know that you have to have your screen on. That's helpful. Make sure your name is there and that you are muted. When you want to ask a question, raise a point, query or share a frustration, make sure you raise your virtual hand. You find that on the participants point on the bottom of your screen. Click on that and you'll find your virtual hand. Please do use it, and so that I know to bring you in. I also want to warmly welcome our participants on live stream. Thank you for joining us and engaging with us, but you're not left out. You can also engage in questions and discussion by making sure you use the Twitter hashtag State of EU and pose your question, pose your issue. We'd welcome that. And just a word of what this is really like, in that sense that this is not like a usual conference. This is what we've built as our round table, where we annually it would be physical, but this time we've kind of spread it over a week. And really, this is an opportunity for us in this virtual Zoom environment to be able to connect, make connections about this issue, think about what the real challenges that we should be considering, but most importantly, identifying what can be done. It's the art of the possible. There are many occasions when you and I, all of us, have been in situations where someone can so fantastically tell us what the nature of the problem is, but we're very short on solutions or ideas. So that's why I want to generate the opportunity that we could actually have a conversation about what are the politics around this issue, around connectivity, what are the ideas we can generate, which are perhaps some of which are already in place. So this is what we want to do here today. Colleagues, you know, those who've been following this, that a constant reminder from me, in particular, and my colleagues who are my fellow moderators, is that we know that the economy, the world economy, is going to shrink. It's going to shrink more than it ever has, up to, at least in historical terms, to the extent of which we were in Second World War. And we know that medium to small income countries are going to shrink for the first time in 60 years. We know that people are going to be pushed into poverty, and we know what the health crisis has been and meant for many millions, hundreds of millions of people, due to inequalities in the system that's inherently there. And what COVID has done has exposed those inequalities, not only in health, but across societies. So that's where connectivity comes in. What we have known is that the big tech giants have earned lots of money, their share prices have rocketed through the roof, and we know that digital health, e-commerce, etc., have extremely gone in surge, if you like. And so connectivity has provided an opportunity, but also a potential solution, but we need to think about it carefully. And for that reason, I have a number of contributors joining us today to actually engage in this conversation. First of all, first and foremost, what I'd like to do is invite Ulrich Westergaard Nunston, who's the Deputy Secretary General of the OECD. Ulrich, are you there? Can you hear me?
I'm here, and I hear you.
Thank you very much. A very warm welcome to you. Tell us,
thank you so much.
Given the overview you have at OECD and the number of countries that you engage in across the world, when you look around Europe and into Europe, what do you think are the right digital policies for Europe, given your engagement thus far and what you think needs to happen? So what are the right policies for digital in Europe?
Well, I think it's difficult, of course, to compare all the European countries. If we look at, for example, how much fiber is laid out, you will see figures ranging from 70% in Latvia to less than 5%, for example, in Germany and Austria. So European countries are at very different levels in the digital transformation, and that of course again can be measured in so many different ways, and not only the one I just did. But I would maybe point to three challenges for Europe looking to the future. One is, and you said it very aptly in the beginning, one is the connectivity problem. If we do not roll out more fiber, if we do not get to 5G, I think that Europe will be losing out on a tremendous opportunity to catch up with the other major powers. Also, when it comes to investment in AI, Europe is lagging behind the US and China. So whether you look at this from a geopolitical viewpoint or an economic viewpoint, or even just a viewpoint of inclusiveness and getting everyone on board this digital transformation, I think connectivity is tremendously important. Secondly, I think Europe has to finish the digital single market. Of course, the single market, and especially the digital single market, hold enormous promises and have built enormous welfare for all Europeans. And this need now to be completed and developed even further. And then I would say the last thing is also for Europe to keep working with international partners. We have provided at the OECD a platform for this when it comes to AI. A little more than a year ago, the OECD countries agreed to the world's very first set of principles for trustworthy stewardship of artificial intelligence. It was approved a few months later at the G20 summit in Japan, the last time we had a physical G20 leaders summit as the G20 principles. We are building on these achievements at the OECD, trying to create. We've created a digital hub, an AI hub, where countries can come together with the data, with the policy analysis, with their best practices, so we can learn from each other on how to tackle artificial intelligence in the future. This is also embedded in our so-called Going Digital project at the OECD, where we try to help member states, and most of them are European, by the way, most of them also members of the EU, where we try to help them steer us into a future, a digital future. So those are the three things maybe I would start with: connectivity, the single digital market, and working with international partners. And under this last heading, of course, there's a huge geopolitical discussion.
Yeah.
Some say that the new Cold War has already arrived, and it plays in arenas such as tech, trade, and territory. It certainly does take place already in the tech arena. So
Exactly.
the EU also has to find its own way and its footing. And just the final thing to say about this is, I would have said all of this 5 months ago, but it's only become even more acute with the COVID-19 crisis, where the digital transformation has actually also shown what it can do to help us through crisis. So it's both a matter of staying ahead of the curve, in some cases catching up to the US and China, but also making sure that we are in Europe resilient for the next crisis.
Ulrich, the one word you didn't use, and I'd like you to touch upon, is inequalities. What about that and the role of connectivity?
I didn't use the word inequality, but I think I did mention inclusiveness because that is.
No, it wasn't a criticism. I just want you to touch upon it.
No.
Yeah.
That's fine, and you're very welcome to criticize, because there are many viewpoints in this discussion. But you're absolutely right that I think inequality will become even more important because the digital divide, or the social digital divide, is a new added dimension to inequality. In some European countries, we're already now talking about connectivity as a human right almost, because we're not connected. It's very difficult to be part of the digital transformation. It's difficult to be part of the workplace. It's difficult to take part in telemedicine. It's difficult to keep abreast with family and friends under lockdown, for example. So you're absolutely right to stress that inequalities, inclusiveness, the digital divide, that is an increasingly important dimension to this whole discussion for societies and individuals, because we've seen that the COVID-19 crisis, because of lack of connectivity, hits women harder, hits the low-skilled harder, hits the unemployed, of course, harder.
Sure, Ulrich, and so I don't want you to answer this question, but I mean, what we need to get better at is describing what the how is and what should be done. So it'd be interesting to know, and I encourage all of you, those of you who have ideas, those of you who are doing stuff in this space, use the Zoom chat to log in your comments or queries and questions. I really encourage you to do that. But I think we all recognize that these divisions and inequalities exist. But as OECD and all the other kind of, let's say, multi-institutional arrangements or multilateral institutions, what are they actually doing in terms of prioritizing the issue of inequality? Because it's going to become even worse, more than we'd ever imagined, but also, going by the numbers at the moment, that there's going to be a huge acceleration, especially when public debt is the highest it's ever been in our history. At the moment, most of our public debt, when you think about in Europe, it's the potential, a percentage of debt to GDP is something like 132%. It's the biggest borrowing hole that we've gone into historically, and many people are not sure how to get out of it. Anyway, so I want to move to a member state, Finland. Welcome. We were going to have Li Andersson, Minister of Education, but she's had to pop out for a really important meeting. And so she's represented more than ably by Min Keller, who is her vice deputy, and also involved in these matters. So one of the things, and welcome to you, Minna.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello. Finland's a bit of an outlier in this matter of connectivity, and it's one of those kind of high achievers. It's done this really well. People look at you and say, is it about your size? Is it about culture? Is it just simply about history? But how has being so progressive on the digital front helped you to cope with the COVID crisis and the economic crisis?
Well, first of all, I'd like to reiterate the point that alongside just transition, or what we sometimes call ecological restructuring, digitalization must be at the core of our recovery. They are both crucial in any case if we want Europe to achieve its goals on sustainability, climate justice, and economic vitality. But the current crisis has brought a new sense of urgency to these tasks. Thanks to the right fiscal policy decisions that we have taken at European Union and national levels, there is now also more funding available to bring about these fundamentally important structural reforms. This is one of the few positive things about our current predicament. This being said, I was very happy to acknowledge that the European Union Commission just reiterated its commitment and ambition towards digital and green transitions. Behind all big societal transformations are people who look ahead, who ask big and bold, and sometimes seemingly stupid questions. People who innovate and take risks. In other words, and referring to your first question, no society is progressive or regressive by nature. Progressive policies require progressive people and enabling environments, which is also the result of collective and sometimes stubborn action by progressive people. All of this is also true in the case of the digital and green transitions that we are talking about today. As State Secretary, of course, I can never stress enough the importance of education and investment in human capital. In my home country, Finland, the big narrative would be that of equal opportunities, meaning also equal access to high quality education at all levels. Our education system is the result of a long-running commitment to these ideals. Today, almost 90% of 25 to 64 years old have completed at least secondary level education, and over 40% have a higher degree. Adult education and lifelong learning are popular and have a high participation rate. In all this, Finland fares quite well in international comparisons.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Minna, that's all. I mean, it's great. It's good to hear. It really is. But in the context of this conversation, it would be really. I think people would be interested to know what is it you've done that's worked. What is it you're doing as a group of other ministers across Europe to really improve our performance and our game in this. I mean, you saw that interesting, by the way, those of you who've been following us will know that we have our resident cartoonist, Tonu, who punctuates our discussion and sometimes holds the mirror up to us in terms of kind of a very cynical or a sarcastic or a very caustic view, but sometimes a realistic view of some of the issues that are being raised. But, Minna, I think people will want to know, what is it you're getting right that you can share, but also what are you doing with other ministers across Europe to get it right?
That's a good question. I think what Finland has done right is we see education not only as a fundamental right, but also a small social investment. And that I think is behind Finland's digital progressiveness.
So the biggest message is that I see it as a social investment rather than a cost. But in terms of working with other ministers, do you have the network, the forum with which you're able to say, actually, digital is a social investment. Let's think about it differently, fellow ministers across Europe, and let's put some muscle behind ourselves on the Commission and the Council to do things different about education and connectivity?
I think that the minister would be the right person to answer to this question.
I'm sorry, I'm placing a lot of stuff on you. Yeah, sure. Okay, I understand. I will take the heat off. I do apologize. I don't mean to be too challenging towards you. And I know that you're stepping in, but these are the questions we need to ask politicians because they're essential and people want to know. But there are others in the audience, I'm sure, with a political experience and political context that can answer or come back to me or us on this. Use the chat function. Can I just say, those of you, don't be shy. Please use the virtual hand. This is not a spectator sport. This is about you coming together with us and all of us to come through and discuss the kind of key issues and the challenges, but also opportunities for change. I want to, if there are no hands up at this stage, I will then move on to our third contributor. And I'm really pleased that we have someone who's again, another one of our household brands, if you like. We've had quite a few of them this week, but they're important and essential in the context in which we find ourselves into the public-private working together to seed social change. We have Vodafone's Group External Affairs Director and member of the Executive Committee, Joachim. Joachim, a warm welcome to you. Tell me, from your perspective, what is the kind of sense for you in terms of this being a pivot moment to make sure that we actually use the Next Gen EU funding, which we know some 20% has been allocated for that, but this seems like a change. I mean, yesterday Frans Timmermans talked about the fact that this is like the tectonic plates are changing under the world, and it is. Everyone's talking about the transformation moment, but we have to make sure those words don't just ring hollow and we see action out of it. You are incredibly well placed as a major telecommunications infrastructure body, if you like, and provider, and you get directly to consumers in many ways. So tell us, this is a pivot point. How do you think, what do you think we need to make sure that it's well used?
I think there are 4 points that I would like to land, and thanks a lot for inviting me. First is make sure that you have your baseline correct. Which is always one thing that I worry about large international or important projects. Second is learn very clearly from what worked. Third, be focused on what matters. And fifth, don't believe that digital is a magic bullet. It does require a number of targeted interventions. If I quickly go through then the baseline, so we're now at the point of a very deep twin crisis. We have the persistence of the health crisis with an extraordinarily challenging economic crisis, which frankly will leave very significant scars, including having some extremely damaging distributional effects. So as a company, we can see that in terms of both our customers on the business side as well as our customers, consumers, and how differently they're affected by this crisis. So for us, of course, obviously, connectivity has proved to be absolutely essential to retain some form of normality in unprecedented times. we also have to recognize that despite the networks managing through this crisis, frankly, our starting point in Europe is not particularly good, which is exactly what Ulrich said in the beginning of this conference. And third is that digital has become and runs the risk of becoming a new dividing line in society between the haves and the have-nots. And we have a special responsibility to address that. My second point on learning what works, for me, the biggest learning by far is having a siloed mindset between governments, industry, or civil society just simply will not work going forward. We have to build on the partnership model. In the midst of this crisis, all of us plow together and try to find solutions. We parked a lot of our past discussions and past practices, and that really broke through in terms of our response. We need to build on that momentum. Third was then, what should we be focused on? Well, frankly, digital needs to be subservient of a number of key divides in the society that we have a unique opportunity to bridge. Number one for me is rural-urban divide, which is a clear problem when it comes to the reach of connectivity. Secondly is that we have very significant divides in people in terms of digital skills. We need to invest much more heavily into those that don't have the capacity to be productive participants in the digital economy. Third, we need to devote enormous attention to improving the digital maturity of SMEs, which are literally falling over in this crisis because they are not upskilled in terms of their digital maturity. And then finally, in relation to those, besides those three divides, for sure, also digital is an incredible subservient of our planet ambitions. So I very much welcome that the Commission has put 37% on planet, and I do believe that digital should contribute to that. The final point I just want to say is digital is not the magic bullet, and it's perhaps weird to come from Vodafone and make that point, but I think it's important. But I think it's important that when we devote ourselves to really project and accelerate the digitization, we need to also acknowledge that it's a lever for society as a whole, but it will only work if it's combined with the right policy reforms, which makes sure that the money goes to where it's supposed to go, as opposed to leaking through the system. But secondly, we also have to recognize we start this digital acceleration in a period where a lot of people have quite significant anxieties around digitization, be it from jobless growth, be it from the level of trust and polarization that may drive. So combining with the right policies also to rebuild that trust, to empower people as opposed to empower corporates or empower technical tools, I think is absolutely important. That's why you need to be value driven and you need to be people oriented in whatever you do with respect to digital ambitions.
Joachim, that's been really helpful. And, you make me think about, I was just reflecting as you were speaking that we've had quite a few CEOs here this week from the private sector. And there's something about the brand, and perhaps it's the demographic or perhaps life experiences, but each of you have articulated yourselves in a way that people may not have recognized, let's say, 10 years ago, little as 10 years ago. And it's good to see there's a kind of more of a soulfulness in the private sector in some respects. But one of the constant discussions that have been happening this week is, are we genuinely seeing a different model of stakeholder capitalism, or is it still the classic shareholder model? And I think one of the things that concerns us, and I think many others, is that especially in the tech space, and you say it's quite right that digital is not the magic bullet, but we're now going to have, let's say, possibly two generations of people that have almost a third appendage, which is their phone. And right from the age of 0, I think so I've seen certain researchers saying kids are getting their access to a smartphone or an iPad from the age of like 6 months to keep them happy. So we're going to witness something very, very different and strange in future generations. And I know this is not a question that's only for you to answer, but interesting to know from your consumer base, or your kind of sense of social responsibility, what are some of the issues that you think we need to what are the signals we should be looking out for, if I may, around this agenda? I know it's a tough one.
Well, it's a very tough one, and it's almost quite philosophical. So let me try to sort of bring it down.
Yes, please do.
My reality and the reality of Vodafone. I don't think it's as simple as just to say that there is that the companies are striving for shareholder value. I think there is a fundamental change happening in a number of companies, and I'm only speaking for my company, which is that we had to reverse engineer ourselves and ask ourselves, why do we exist? What's our license to exist? Okay. And once you start that journey as a company, you come to fact that you stand for a number of values, and these values you live and breathe in everything you do. And for us, that's basically our purpose. Now, we also believe that the capital markets are changing towards shareholder value. There is a big push, and rightly so, for ESG funds. So this makes commercial sense as well. Just as other consumers are increasingly buying things on the basis of companies that they feel aligned to from a value point of view. So I think there is a big move within the broader market space and with companies. But I think a lot of companies have, much like Unilever or Vodafone, actually started a journey by which they have taken away their product and started thinking about their values first. Yeah. And that's translating through. Then I think, if I may say, COVID is a real shock to the system. It's not only about how we service our customers. Our first and foremost objective in everything we do is the health and safety of our employees. We were very unfortunate to be in some of the worst hit regions in Europe when the crisis hit, right? And we were working side by side with the mayor of Bergamo, just trying to make sure that patients in the hospitals could call their loved ones before they put on ventilators, before literally were very few people managed to get through. So this is something that our staff lived through with anxiety in their family. So we basically said, screw it. We're going to respond with one thing. We're there to save life. We're there to help society as well as government save life. And then when I had to go to the board and just to share a piece of information, in beginning of May, when we started seeing that this is going to translate into an economic crisis, I was asked by the board to describe the scenario as I saw it. I said, just read one book, Of Mice and Men, John Steinbeck. That's probably not a normal conversation.
No, you shock me, absolutely. Go on, carry on, sorry. I just haven't had reference to that for such a long time. Go on. Why Of Mice and Men?
But it's a great book of a society that it gets so scarred, and the poverty levels and the enormous suffrage that society goes through in a deep economic crisis, and therefore you need to have that human connection with what society is going to go through. So we have really tried to, as a company, to think through in the different phases of the crisis, from saving life to now sort of rebuilding, what should be our role. Why do we exist in those societies? How do we service those societies in the best way possible? And it comes from a genuine base of a value.
And how do they react to your recommendation of Mice and Men, rather than you saying, right, ladies and gentlemen, this is I've done the economic forecast and our baseline is this, and this is where I've done the risk assessment, but no, read Mice of Men. What was the reaction?
I must say there was quite a bit in the boardroom, but it created a good discussion, not necessarily from a literature circle point of view, but just point of view of resetting people's expectation. We're not going to go back to normal.
Yep.
This is going to be with us for a long time, and there will be a new normal coming out of this.
Sure. Thank you, Joachim. Thank you for being so candid. It helps. And I think it's more important that leaders, both in the public-private sector, are much more comfortable in their skin to have this kind of conversation. Are there any people who want to react to what we've heard so far? Are there any people who've raised, who are desperate to get in there? Because I'd like to break this up before we bring in our fourth contributor, which would be really helpful. So we have, of course we do. Let me just invite, because someone who's been kind of quite keen to come in, and someone who's done a number of things within a company that's very little known I think in the EU, but has a significant history and presence in Europe and in India in particular, and that's Ashish Gupta from HCL. Ashish, a very warm welcome to you. Good to have you with us.
Good afternoon. Yeah, pleasure.
Perhaps just very briefly, Ashish, you might want to spend 30 seconds just telling us about HCL, because it doesn't have that kind of brand reputation in Europe. But I know the historical things, not just because I'm an Indian, but I know because I'm conversant with India. So 30 seconds on HCL.
HCL Technologies, $10 billion IT services firm spread all across Europe. I manage the Europe and Africa business for HCL, and been here for about 20 odd years. So Europe has been good to us, and I think we've been very good for all our customers in Europe. We work with a lot of large brands, enabling them to sort of, as I say, pivot to the digital now, and do it at an accelerated pace.
Okay. What's your question or issue, Ashish?
My question was really, and it was just a comment and maybe a question to Joachim. I loved, some of the divisions which he very rightly presented, right? as we accelerate to the new, as we accelerate to a more digital future, we are really going to start seeing massive divisions, right? And I think he called it absolutely beautifully. You're going to start seeing more urban-rural divides. You're going to see, the haves in terms of skills versus people who don't have the skills, right? You're going to start seeing the division between, winner takes all versus SMEs who are going to struggle, right? And you're really also going to see a huge amount of issues around the planet, right? And I'm not sure if, I'm sure everybody's watched the David Attenborough sort of, commentary on what we've done to the planet thus far. Now, I'm a believer that actually every opportunity or every crisis is a massive opportunity, right? And therefore, I was just very keen to understand from Vodafone's point of view or from anybody else's that are there lessons which people have learned on how do you get the pivot to digital coincide with reducing inequality and reducing the impact to planet, right? And reducing some of the other fissures in the way in which proceed. Because if we don't get this right, then we are really headed for trouble, not just as a planet, but in society and all the other spheres which all of us work in.
Ashish, thank you very much. Thank you for joining us, and it'd be good to see, how people make connections amongst companies like yourselves and Vodafone in the future in this space. But thank you for your comment. I want to move to one of our Gen Y contributors, Elisa.
Yes, hi. My name is Elisa. And
Hello.
I'm a UNICEF activist from Italy. So I just wanted to point out that the key to an inclusive society is to hold space for the minorities, especially in these unprecedented times. Young people as digital natives have the capacity to adapt well to a new digital era. So I think that it's essential to include them in the decision-making process.
Okay.
Post-COVID-19 era needs to be as inclusive and progressive as possible. And to work out, the only way to do this is to include all younger citizens in the conversation.
Elisa, what you might want to put on the chat, the Zoom chat, is, what do you actually really want? That's a statement about what should happen, but how can it happen? If you have any ideas, you've got a captured audience here. It'd be good to see what you think should happen. I'm now going to go to Anne. Is it Anne Yer? One of our European young leaders. Sorry, difficult hearing there. Anne? Are you there, Anya? Okay, whilst we try and connect with her, let's go straight to Carl Benedict Frey. Carl, you've been a regular contributor in our sessions. Just for the benefit of our audience here today, just introduce yourself very briefly on what your question or query is, or idea.
Hello, my name is Carl Frey. I'm co-director of the program of the Future of Work here at Oxford Martin School at Oxford University. I didn't actually realize I had my hand up, but I do have a question. So if we look prior to COVID, we see that there are very different patterns of remote work across European societies. And the front leader here has really been Finland. We see that up to, I think, 70
We're losing you, Carl.
Which was something like.
So, Carl, I just have to stop you because the connection is too poor. Sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah, I do apologize. This is one of the risks and jeopardies, and I have to move on because we can't hear you. It's a shame. But Carl, why don't you put what you're going to say on the chat so people can respond to you? I want Anne Reichert. Anne Reichert?
Yes,
one of our
now
European
I'm online,
leaders.
hopefully.
Hello, Anne.
Hello, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Good to see you. Please, for the benefit of others, introduce yourself.
So my name is Anne Bartel. I am sitting in Berlin, and I am the founder of Ready School of Digital Integration, which is a tech school teaching refugees and people with forced migration background to code and also digital literacy. I just wanted to second that my experience during the lockdown has been that the people who are already marginalized from society are getting more marginalized. We have seen that our students needed to sometimes go and sit in the subway during COVID because it was the only place that they had internet connection. We had a lot of support from Vodafone Foundation, and I really appreciate that they put their actions where their mouths are, because they really did help us get internet into the refugee camps. It was difficult, but it is possible. And we can see how much digital connection actually changes the mindset and also the psychosocial experience of our students being locked up essentially in the refugee camps with a lot of other people in a very difficult situation. So just a big shout out to Vodafone. Really appreciate what they have done.
Well, look at that, Joachim. You didn't expect that. That wasn't even a setup. That was completely, a response. I mean, aren't you just so happy there? But don't comment right. I'll bring you in later. You have enough space for the moment of love coming from the, from this audience here. I want to go to, and thank you, Anne, for that comment. But it's good to know. Because, yesterday, those of you might have followed the conversation where we had Franz Timmerman. One of the things he says that, if we're going to sort this out, we actually need bandwidth and broadband across Europe in a way that we've never imagined before. And until we sort that out, we're not going to sort out inequality or other matters of importance. I want to go to one of our Gen Y participants, Esmat.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm going to introduce myself.
Please.
My name is Esmat, and I'm from Egypt. I live right now in Spain. I just wanted to build on the points mentioned before in terms of using technology post-COVID and the digital tools to reach minorities and small communities. And to suggest that I know in many cases we look at COVID with the negative consequences of unemployment and the slow education that will be running nowadays. But I also want to say that if we look at digital tools as a very good opportunity to connect young people who come from diaspora communities or even from outside the EU, but they have a lot of business having intercultural dialogue with European young people.
Yeah.
And even with young people who are not the elites, who speak 1 or 2, 3 languages and come from big cities and always participate in opportunities, but rather the ones who have never been to an exchange program or they have never been to an intercultural opportunity before.
Yeah.
So we can always use these digital tools also to have policymakers who don't need to travel to be in a youth summit to speak with young people, but they can just sit in front of their computer and learn of what the community of youth that is sometimes being treated as minorities have to say.
Yeah, absolutely. As points well made, and I suppose there's frustration historically that actually, rather than simply engage and consult, treat with respect as an active person with agency, and not simply someone to be consulted, but actually you have lots of assets around you to be able to build. I want to go to Rebecca, one of our final contributors that we teed up for this discussion to generate ideas, and that's Rebecca Minghella. Rebecca, obviously welcome. You're one of our European young leaders, and what I wanted is you're founder of Clarity AI, and you've been in the entrepreneurial space, and some of the issues that you've heard are obviously things you're well versed with. I mean, in the context of connectivity, how do we make money work in a way in terms of tackling the issue of sustainability, but also inequality? Two big questions, but given your vantage point, sometimes I think the people who are outside this, outside the bigger systems of public-private sector have a different sense of clarity, if you like. Over to you, Rebecca.
Yeah. So yeah. I mean, that's a great question. How do we make sure that the money that is invested either by private investors or by public sector is invested according to the most pressing needs, right? And that has become even a more important question during this COVID crisis, right? So how do we make sure that from the money that we put to work, again, not just the public sector, but also investors or the private sector, we are investing it according to the biggest priorities to make the world more sustainable and to have less inequality. And that's actually one of the things that we try to do with Clarity AI, our platform, but it has to do a lot with connectivity, the topic of this panel. But because what we try to do is leverage insane amount of data that we have, because there is still a lot of data available, again, by public sector and private sector to be used that is not being used. Then build the appropriate cloud infrastructure to make sure that and the technology platforms to make sure that we can analyze that data. The capabilities, of course, the skills, and I think Joachim also touched on that, and Ulrich touched on the investment in artificial intelligence, and even Mina said about the investment in human capital. So we have to make sure that people know or have the skills to build those cloud infrastructures, the tech infrastructures, and to analyze, as I said, insane amount of data that is already available that we are not taking advantage of. And then, of course, science and research, that we need to invest more in R&D, in science, in research. It's not just about technology. It's also about the proper research. So what we have done with our platform is just a very, very small example, which is building a platform in which we gather data from different sources on sustainability, so organizations, countries, local governments. We analyze that data, so we build a tech and cloud infrastructure to analyze that data and make it accessible to the different society stakeholders, mostly focusing on investors, also corporates, but mostly focusing on investors, so we can make better decisions, including sustainability factors into their investment decisions. So if they have a portfolio, they can understand the impact of their or sustainability of their portfolios based on different goals. It might be climate change, it might be diversity, it might be the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the new European taxonomy on sustainable investment.
Roberta,
right?
if I can pause you just to make it real for people. So you could have investors investing in hotels, a chain of hotels, and they're raising capital. They could be investing in a whole range of cafes, or let's say other type of, let's say, technology infrastructure. And what you do is assess that in terms of both the risk and opportunity around some of these issues of sustainability?
Yes, not just risk and opportunities from the financial perspective, but also from the impact perspective. So as we all know, impact is getting more and more important for investors. They don't look not only, fortunately, they are looking more and more into actual impact and not just that pure financial performance. So we try to do both, right? There is, of course, a financial risk linked to certain sustainability metrics, as we all know more and more, but also looking at actual impact. So what is your impact on society by investing in this hotel company versus this other hotel company that might be employing more women, or might have a lower carbon footprint, or so those are the kind of trade-offs that we are looking at.
Excellent. So I want to kind of pose this question to both you and Joachim, in particular, actually, is about, in that kind of capital flows, financial markets world, and I don't want you to answer this straight away, I'll come back to both of you on this, is that what do you want from government as a result? And I asked this question of both the CEO of Danone and also the Vice President of Coca-Cola this week, is that, what do you want of government as a result, if it's going to make you do what you want to do and your aspirations or your values perform better and get to the place you want to be? Before you do, I want to bring in an MEP, Maria Manuel Leitao. Maria?
Yes, I'm sorry. Thank you very much. I think the discussion is very important on public data, because there are a lot of very important public data, not only relate to health, and we discussed this today in the morning and yesterday too, not only related to but also with mobility, energy, and education, and that can be used. And now they are stored in each country, and that can be used to support research. And what I would like to stress is that this project Gaia-X that is being developed between France and Germany, open to other member states, could be an important cloud in order to store this kind of data and making them available to researchers and to public services to develop their activity and develop AI-based projects. Thank you.
But one of the things that you might want to add on the chat, I don't want to ask you right now, is that Europe's investing in some of the largest supercomputer capacity. What about that? And what's the relationship to what's happening in the private sector? Is that a kind of a joint enterprise? But please do come back on the chat rather than coming back to me right now. I want to take a member state perspective from one of our European young leaders, one of our alumni, Zander. Can I invite you? Just briefly say who you are and your designation, if you like. Zander, welcome.
Yes, greetings from Riga, Parliamentary Secretary at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. But of course, we always discuss how Europe can more invest in digital economy and digital infrastructure. But in the context of this discussion, I think it's very important to think not only on the infrastructures, but on the skills, as already was said. And my question today is, how can we bring more elderly generation in this digital connectivity and digital skills upgrading? Because I think especially during the COVID time, when we are not able to visit each other and not able to meet in person so much, so the younger generation is connected via digital instruments, but I we need more opportunity for the elderly ones and maybe an EU-wide perspective.
Well, Zander, I was going to, if I can, sorry to interrupt you. Zander, if I can, because I'm running out of time and I want to bring others in. So please encourage you all, put your hands up or engage and we'll engage, we'll get into the conversation. It's the same question I asked Mina, is that what are you doing with other people in your political status across the EU to address that question? So what would be helpful to me, rather than bring you back on that, is to put that on the chat, because I think people will be interested to know that how do you use your position of influence and the political capital you have within Europe to improve that agenda. I also want to see if there's anybody else that's interested in coming in. We haven't had conversations about, we've talked about inequality, we've talked about age, we haven't said a lot about gender and what the gender inequality implications are. But also, what would be interesting to understand is that what are the 5 things or 3 things you think the next gen budget and the EU Recovery Fund should focus on? Just take a second or two just to write that down, because I can't do a poll because we can't read all the hands up virtually. But it'd be good to know what you think the 3 or 4 things should be essential. Should it be conditionality, gender equality, sustainability? Big words, I know, but to actually specify them if you can, because I think this is about then parceling up some of this information back into those in power and policymakers to think differently about how we move forward. As I've said constantly this week, it's the largest use of taxpayers' money in our history. And people will not be forgiving if they don't see it trickling down, but actually making a change to their circumstances as we move forward. I'm pleased to know that we've got someone from Twitter, a question on our live stream. Can we have you through?
Sorry. And thank you, Dharmendra, and thank you to
Hello, Caroline.
all the...
Yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you, Dharmendra, and thank you to all the panelists for the interesting contributions and discussions. Indeed, we have a question from our online audience, this person says that on the world stage, American and Chinese supergiants dominate the digital market. Should the EU create its own European champions to compete internationally? What do the contributors think?
Or what does everybody else think? Not just the contributors. There's a lot of you here in this space who are, you are, big in your own right. You're significant. You're huge in what you do. One of the things I'd like to do is bring in, I think I can see Lindsay Nafresh Clark, and I'm going to pick on you shamelessly. You're a woman you're a woman of substance in many ways, right? You've created the, W4. And can you just briefly respond to this question? Because we know Europe's bad at scale up. We know it's got excellent lab, and I mean lab in terms of tech, R&D, etc., facilities across the piece. What's your response to what you've heard? Then I'm going to bring in Joachim and others to kind of wrap up.
So, Dharmendra, if I may, what's my response to the previous question,
You
or
know,
in general about the subject of? Go ahead.
No, the question is that, you know, we've heard from someone saying, actually, should we be creating our own big beasts in Europe? And, you know, look inwards and therefore compete against the giants of the US and China? Very quickly.
Okay. I'm not sure we should all be aspiring to big beasts, because we're seeing the dangers of big beasts. I mean, it's a controversial issue, so I'm not sure about that. What I do think is that I'm going to strike an upbeat note on this issue, is that fortunately in Europe, I think governments and at the European Commission level we're well aware of the digital skills gap, and that this can be hugely costly to Europe because of this digital skills supply demand mismatch. So I put in the chat, I find it staggering that it's estimated, and this is a European Commission figure, that it's 44% of European citizens don't have basic digital skills, when you know it's 90% of jobs require digital skills, and 40% of employers are not finding the ICT specialists they need. The good thing about this is that it's also raised awareness about the key point that you made, Dharmendra, about also the digital dimension of this. So we really need to mobilize the resources that we have in Europe. And maybe just to say, I think there is a lot of great work going on. We now have digital scorecard, which was implemented at the EU level. But I would say that COVID should have shown all of us, and I think it's pretty obvious, the urgency of this issue. And I also posted in the chat that I think approaching this in terms of a human rights issue, if that can be a catalyst, and if that can make us wake up and see the urgency of this across all sectors, then that would be a good thing. I hope that answered the question.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Thank you. Lovely to see you. I'm going to go speak to one of our other young leaders also. It's Camilla. Camilla, introduce yourself and what your issue. And I need you to be choppy because I've only got 5 or 6 minutes left. Sorry. As ever.
Hi, everyone.
I'm always running out.
My name is Camilla Sultanov. I'm a Young European Leader 2015, and I'm a public speaker and workforce diversity consultant. And I'm really caring about the teacher access to digital skills, and how in Finland, even right now, we're looking at Plan International perspective. They put a 16-year-old girl in place of Prime Minister Sanna Marin, and she really spoke about the gender aspect to this, and also the choice of careers and the whole stereotypes around choosing, because Nordic countries remain very gender divided labor market. So we need to also address that. So how do we teach teachers to be digital savvy, and how can they also promote, and career counselors guide people to their digital fluency and literacy. I also 3 years ago at the same State of Europe event, I remember hearing Molenbeek Lab Ibrahim saying that so many schools are today a lie, and I would only welcome to make sure that schools deliver a promise that we get the skills we need to operate in a digital market or future market. We need to create, the cooperations experiments which are happening right now in Finland, for example, to bridge social inequality in young people, the cooperations with teachers, with tech companies, and make sure that the private sector helps the education really formulate what kind of skills are needed. How do you motivate? We need a fundamentally different approach to teaching skills, and how to be not be afraid to fail, especially in choosing this. And one of the examples would be in Finland, we have a World Failure Day, 13th of October. We just had it. So I would definitely connect the teachers, the labs, the cross-sectoral collaboration, and the gender aspect.
I know, but what we've heard from Finland is that it feels like a country that's very comfortable in its skin to be able to do the kind of things that you've just, set out. And we need more of that, both from the leadership, you could see the gender issue there, but also others. I can't imagine some of the bigger economies saying, let's have a World Failure Day, because it will be seen as, my goodness, it can't possibly do that. But anyway, thank you very much.
It's
lovely to see you again. I need to move to close. I want to bring back some of our initial contributors. And very briefly, Ulrich, from what you've heard and what you know about what's happening across the globe, in fact, what's the kind of key message that you want to leave us with? Not necessarily in terms of what you think the problem is, but what's the one or two things that could actually be a game changer in this, Ulrich? I know it's tough. Ulrich, have I lost you?
No, I unmuted. I wanted to have said something in the beginning, but I think Rebecca and just a second ago, Lindsay as well reiterated that point about digital skills, because of course connectivity is important, but connectivity without digital skills doesn't really matter. And that goes from the education system all the way up to vocational training, upskilling, reskilling. So I'm glad that that others here made the digital skills point. It's so important. Having said that, I will then turn to Joachim and agree with him. This is turning out to be quite a session for Joachim and Vodafone. And for full disclosure, I should say that I used to work for Vodafone only briefly in 2013. But I happen to
colleagues, can I just say, this is not a setup. We did not plan any of this. This is just happening. So over to you. We're a think tank, for goodness sake. We have to watch ourselves.
I just want to say that I very much agree that we are entering a new normal. This is not only because of the digital transformation, it's not only because of the health crisis, but it's also because of what this is doing to our economy. We are predicting 4.5% negative growth this year.
Yeah.
IMF yesterday came out with 4.4, so
exactly.
We're pretty much in agreement on this. This means some sectors will disappear, some sectors will be diminished, some sectors are in for hard times, they may be able to reinvent themselves. But in other areas, not least in the digital sector, if you can even talk about a digital sector, because we're all digital now, but there are tremendous opportunities also. This means that as we continue down this path of reinventing our societies, this is also a great opportunity to look at green growth, to look at biodiversity, to look at climate change, but also to look at this digital divide. We have a possibility to build back better, as they say. But it's not just a slogan. We have never seen politicians commit so many means, not ever before. And we're seeing also in the EU that most of them are earmarked for digital and green. That's really, really good. But there is a tremendous opportunity also in this crisis.
Thank you very much. And can you not answer this question to me directly, but I'm really interested in this, is that, you know, one of the problems about the epidemic and the crisis is that we realize that the failure to invest in primary healthcare and public healthcare systems has basically busted us. But we knew that was going to come. In terms of education and skills, you know, what you and others have said, Lindsay, is that are we seeing a change in the investment model of education so that it's more tech savvy, so it helps both the supply and the demand of education to be fit for the future? Don't answer that question now, but please put it on the thing, on the chat, because I think that's a central question for us. Is it not? If we're going to stop chest beating the fact that we need skills, etc., but actually, structurally, the system has to invest differently and better for a different outcome. Joachim, can I bring you back, please? And you know, you're obviously glowing and shining from all this kind of yes, Vodafone's great type of thing. But please respond to some of the questions that you've heard. But I think in particular, Joachim, it would be good to know what is it you want from government.
All right, yeah, because I did think about that question, because you gave it earlier. And thanks a lot for a high-paced interaction, which is extremely useful. If again, try to land what do I want from government? What do I think is needed from government? So number one, if digital is the next cardiovascular system of our economy and our society, which I think de facto it's becoming to be. So that's why it's good not to talk about it as a sector, but actually talk about it as something that enables the whole society. So number one, understand that. Number two, then, unclog the artery system, the parts of our artery system which is failing. And that's where you go to the question around the divides, and that's where you go with targeted intervention. You do need to have that. And so ultimately we need to set the ambition that we don't leave any European citizen or business behind in deploying all these enormous helicopter money that the EU is investing. But that's not going to be good enough in itself. And that's why you need the third thing, which is the sense of urgency importance of resetting the policy environment. I spent 20 years in government before I moved over to Vodafone. It was the first time I encountered, coming into Vodafone, the concept of return on investment. Governments don't get it, right?
Yeah, I know.
Governments just don't get it. So unless you figure this out, and unless that's why the partnership becomes so important, and that goes to the point that Rebecca said as well, you can measure impact. You know, you need to have the data-driven understanding. Where do you deploy the resources to get the best return on investment, both from a societal point of view, but also to get the cardiovascular system to work? Unfortunately, governments are not there yet. societies, in terms of civil society, industry, needs to create that sense of urgency and importance that we had hoped that COVID would have created. But unfortunately, we see slippage back to BAU when it comes to that. And that goes to the final question, which I think was raised on social media on US, China, big tech.
Yeah.
Listen, this is not a game of who can sort of in a guerrilla fight punch their chests in the biggest and most ferocious way. Ultimately, take a deep breath and just start thinking about this. Why is Europe failing on creating skilled players? It's not failing because it has bad innovators and people are uneducated and we don't have great startups. It is failing because we don't have scale.
Yeah.
You can't scale in Europe. Right? And that's a big difference in the tech space or in the digital space or in the space that I belong to compared to, say, if you're a car manufacturer, where you do have a full EU internal market. We don't have an internal market with respect to digital. And the example Rebecca gave on data is a great example. I mean, we were supposed to help governments flatten the curve, provide them mobility insights during the crisis. We did everything in our power. We worked with the IMF, UNICEF, World Bank. We worked with the European Commission. And guess what? In the EU, when we work with the IMF, we can only give 3 countries' data to help them do targeted interventions on gender equality and youth unemployment, because the rest of the EU member states couldn't figure out a way of sharing anonymized and aggregated data that is fully compliant with GDPR. This is just not good enough.
I know. Excellent. There is this thing that, when you think about younger generations and how they are able to, in such a savvy way, do the kind of extraordinary things on their smartphones and also in their daily lives, that governments can't create a plug-and-play model of data sharing and what that should be about. But then again, look, go figure, at the moment, you walk down one street in Belgium, you wear a mask. Another street, you don't. You go to one country, wear a mask, you don't wear another mask in another. Despite the fact the World Health Organization says, mask, wash, distance. Yet every country is deciding that, I think we'll do it differently. For what reason? So anyway, I think that's the issue for us, is that we really need to kind of up our game on the digital space. So I have to conclude, I'm afraid. It's been great to have you all here, but please do continue on the chat, especially that point. We heard yesterday from Frans Timmermans, Executive Vice President, and others this week about the scale of opportunity that the Recovery Fund and the Next Gen Fund provides, including the Green Deal. And he said very clearly, I need political pressure. I need pressure from all sides. So give him that pressure and give the politicians the pressure that actually we want conditionality, equality, etc., greenness, digital revolution, all in one, because it's possible, because actually future generations are doing it and they will demand it. Because one thing I can finish with is that our citizens poll that we have every year, we polled 10,500 citizens across Europe, and we asked them what the priority should be for the EU in the next 5 years. And over a third of citizens across Europe are really clear that they want to prioritize technology, science, and research. It's a mid-ranking priority, but it's an important one, but something to build on. Colleagues, thank you all very much. It's been a pleasure to have you all. And as we're on the glide path down to finishing and concluding #State of Europe, but please do continue to be connected with us. We have another couple of sessions and a very lovely evening concert that you can also participate in. It's been a pleasure and a joy to be working with you all. Thank you. Continue to chat, as I said, both on the web, on the Zoom chat, but also on #State of EU. It's been a great opportunity. Thank you. Mind your distance and take care, and see you all again very, very soon. Thank you very much.